Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to session number 14 of our course of the Organization Theory and Design. And today we are moving into a very important area of theory and design, because today we are going to compare how technologies differ in manufacturing and service organizations. Now this is important because if the technology is different, so far we have seen that the contextual factors like environment, size, when they vary, the organizational structure, the organizational design varies. We saw that in turbulent dynamic environments, the organizational structure and design are more or less organic, free-flowing and fluid, while in stable and less turbulent environments, the organizational structure does not need to be fluid and free-flowing. On the other hand, it is also stable in the sense that it is tall, it is controlled through hierarchies, and it is not free-flowing, and the overall design is mechanistic. And we also saw that depending on the size of a company, if the size is very small, then a company will usually have an organic or a simple structure, and in a medium-sized company or in large companies, the control is usually obtained through bureaucracy, and very large organizations with multiple product lines split themselves up into strategic business units, and medium-sized organizations with turbulent environment have the answer in the shape of a matrix structure. So we saw that size also affects the structure and design of an organization. Environment also affects the structure and design of an organization, and technology, as we know, is another contextual variable which has its repercussion on the organization and the various systems working inside the organization. Now technology, if we want to define it, we know that technology is basically the process of converting inputs into outputs. This refers to tools, techniques, machines and actions used to transform organizational inputs, which could be materials or information or ideas, into outputs which could be products and services. Now this example will be, or this definition will be further clarified if we take on two examples, one from production sector and the other from service sector. For example, suppose we are dealing with a company which produces paper or paper board, gatta jise hum kehte. Now we have just said that technology refers to the tools, equipment, machines and actions used to transform the inputs into outputs. Now I am giving these examples so that the notion of technology and the breadth and width of technology, the term technology, and its impact on the structure and systems and procedures becomes clear to you. Now, what are the inputs required to make a paper board? बहुत सी inputs हैं. इसमें पुराना कागज भी है, इसमें straw भी है, घास तिनके भी हैं, इसमें पुरानी गत्ता, पुरानी जो इंडस्ट्री की पैकेजिंग मटेरियल है वो भी है. तो वो मटेरियल लिया जाता है. इसके बाद कई किस्म के टूल्स यूज होते हैं, एंड टूल्स वेरी फ्रॉम वेरी सोफिस्टिकेटेड टूल्स टू वेरी लार्ज एंड हैवी मैकेनिकल टूल्स. टेक्निक्स, कहीं पर प्रोसेस इज प्योरली केमिकल इन नेचर, समवेयर इट बिकम्स अ बिट मोर फिजिकल, कहीं पर प्रोसेस इज वेरी वेट, कहीं कहीं पर व्हेन इट स्टार्ट्स इट इज नॉट ऑल दैट वेट. तो ये सारी टूल्स, ये सारी टेक्निक्स, ये सारी की सारी मशीनरी और the actions of the employees, actions of the people who are working in the plant, they are all converting those straw and the old paper and the industrial garbage into a new paper board. So ये technology, if you look at the technology of a paper board production, then the technology is roughly like that. What about the technology used in service organizations? Now for a service organization, technology includes the equipment and procedures for delivering the service. बिकॉज सर्विस भी दो तरह की होती है, जैसे हम बाद में देखेंगे. कुछ सर्विसेज ऐसी हैं विच आर प्योरली कंसर्न्ड विद सर्विस ओनली, एंड देयर आर सर्टेन सर्विसेज विच इन्वॉल्व प्रोडक्शन एंड सर्विस बोथ. बट फॉर प्योरली service organization, technology will mean the equipment and the procedures which are needed and which are required for delivering that particular service. For example, if a company is in the business of beautifying people or is in the business of cosmetology, then all those equipment, all those procedures, whether they are manual procedures or whether they are automated procedures, all those things which are used to deliver these services to the client will be called as technology. Technology is an organization's production process. Basically, if we are talking about production companies, then technology will revolve around the production process of that particular company. Or if it is service organization, then we can see that technology will, there is no production as such, but then technology will be all those procedures and all those equipments used in delivering that service to the client. And it will include work procedures as well as machineries. Now, first of all, we will, before we discuss the differences between service and manufacturing organizations, and before we discuss anything further on the technology, first of all, we will talk about an historical study which was undertaken by Woodward, and in that study she assessed the various levels of technical complexity which an organization, which is in manufacturing organization, can encounter. Now, Woodward's study, which was conducted on 100 organizations in 1950s, according to that study, she classified manufacturing firms according to their technical complexity of the manufacturing process. 100 फर्म्स उन्होंने स्टडी की, तमाम की तमाम मैन्युफैक्चरिंग या प्रोडक्शन इंडस्ट्री से उनका ताल्लुक था, एंड वहां पर उन्होंने क्लासिफाई किया उन प्रोडक्शन प्रोसेसेस को अकॉर्डिंग टू देयर टेक्निकल कंप्लेक्सिटी. नाउ, टेक्निकल कंप्लेक्सिटी शी डिफाइंड एज द एक्सटेंट ऑफ मैकेनाइजेशन ऑफ मैन्युफैक्चरिंग प्रोसेस, यानी जहां पर प्रोडक्शन प्रोसेस में मशीन का इस्तेमाल कम था, उनको, उन प्रोसेसेस को वुडवर्ड ने ग्रेड किया एज टेक्निकली लेस कॉम्प्लेक्स एज कंपेयर टू दोज ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस वेयर द एक्सटेंट ऑफ मैकेनाइजेशन या मशीन का इस्तेमाल ज़्यादा था. तो इसका मतलब ये चीज़ हमारी समझ में आती है कि प्रोडक्शन प्रोसेस के दौरान जितना मशीन यूज़ होगी उतनी ही टेक्निकल कंप्लेक्सिटी ऑफ दैट प्रोडक्शन प्रोसेस विल बी हाई. एंड वी कैन ऑल्सो deduce from this information that since in a highly complex technical process, the role of machine will be much more important than that of man, whereas in low technical complexity, the role of workers will be of prime importance. ये तो ठीक है, even behind the machines there are workers, but as we will see, their relative roles will vary or will differ in depending on whether the technical complexity of a production process is high or whether it is low. So is basis based on this notion of technical complexity, Woodward then identified various types of, in fact 3 types of production processes. पहले का नाम उन्होंने रखा स्मॉल बैच एंड यूनिट प्रोडक्शन. पहला प्रोसेस जो हम क्लासिफाई कर रहे हैं production process को according to their technical complexity. So the first one was unit production and small batch. This is like a job shop, and job shop is where small orders are assembled on the specific request and specific demands of the customers. For example, imagine a shop where shoes are made on order. होते हैं ना कई आपने लोग देखे होंगे जो शू स्टोर्स, रिटेल स्टोर से जाके शू नहीं खरीदते, बल्कि वो अपने शू के लिए ऑर्डर देते हैं. That particular shop which designs their shoe, which take the individual customer order and then take the individual foot as a prototype, जिसकी बेस पे वो बनाते हैं product, and they take into account the specific needs of the customer. For example, the customer might have a very big foot, maybe he's size 12 and his size is not available from anywhere else, and that is why he has to come to a customized shop. तो ये जो हालात होंगे, इसमें हम देखेंगे कि production will be in small batches and unit production. In this type of organization, we will also see that human operators have prime importance over machines because there are not many machines used. देखिए, machines को आप वहीं पे यूज करेंगे ज़्यादा जहाँ पर you can predict the process, where the process is not customized but is standardized. यहाँ पर process customized है because each customer has different needs. Some customer has within that 11 or 12 size feet will have different demands of the heels. Another one will require a different sort of heel. We cannot standardize this. Therefore, it cannot be very easily mechanized. इसी तरह jewelers, small jewelers who are also designing their product and also selling it, they are also doing, and they are taking customer orders. ये वाले जो jewelers हैं, they are a representation of small batch unit production. A tailoring shop is also a good example of small batch and unit production because they are also taking orders on specific needs of customers. Job shop arrangement hai. They are assembling those small orders, and the human operator is much more important than the machine. So all these small cottage type of businesses or small businesses will usually belong to the small batch and unit production. And we will see later on that this type of production process has its own requirement of a structure and design, and the other two, which we are going to discuss shortly, have their own requirements of organizational design and structure. And that is why we are discussing them, because we want to design organizations and departments according to the not only the environment and size and goals and strategies, but also according to the technology. The technology should also be accommodated through that design or through that structure. The second type of production process which Woodward highlighted was called large batch and mass production. पहले हमने कहा small batch unit production. Now we are talking about long production runs of standardized parts, output going into inventory, and customer not having special needs. Now that is a typical example of mass production, and a classical example of this type of large batch and mass production will be in automobile assembly line. कारें जब बनती हैं assembly line में, तो वहाँ long production runs होते हैं, standardized parts बन रहे होते हैं, एक ही तरह के carburetor बन रहे हैं, एक ही तरह के radiator के parts बन रहे हैं, because they are going to get fed into the cars which are very similar. And the customers don't have any involvement in this process of production because this process of production does not fulfill the demands or needs of customers. We are not talking about Ferrari, we are talking about ordinary automobiles. And here the role of machine is much more important than operators, because production runs are long and the aim is to produce standardized parts, not customized parts. Now obviously a machine is much better in standardizing than a human being, because human being can commit human errors. They cannot be as precise as a machine. Therefore there can be problems in producing exactly the same parts day in and day out, but a machine will do it. So this type of production process will be more complex than what we have discussed under small batch and unit production. And the example we have already given, the assembly lines, classic example, and especially the assembly lines for automobiles. The third type of production process which Woodward identifies is called the continuous process production. यहाँ पर the entire process is mechanized. Assembly line में the entire process is not mechanized. Parts of assembly line can be mechanized, parts of assembly line can be highly mechanized, but not the entire process. In continuous process, the entire production process is depending upon machines or is mechanized. There is no starting and stopping of that process. It is a 24-hour continuous process. Assembly line, you can have one shift of 8 hours or two shifts of 16 hours. Small batch and unit production, similarly, you can work for 2 hours depending on because it is job shop in nature, so it depending on the amount of work, it can finish in 2 hours or it might take 10 hours or maybe more. But in continuous process, we cannot stop the process. Here, mechanization and standardizations are one step ahead of assembly line. Outputs are highly predictable because standardization obviously is highly present. And ideal examples of this type of continuous production process is chemical plants, oil refineries, and you will appreciate that chemical plants and oil refineries are not shut down. Because if you shut them down, then the cost of restarting and the time wasted and the time delays which are involved are too high. And the company, the organization, the production process might not sustain frequent breakdowns and frequent shutdowns because startup cost, startup time is quite high. So ये तीन तरह की वुडवर्ड ने हमारे सामने organizations और वो production organizations को रखा, and she identified the differences in the procedures and in the philosophy of these processes. Now we will compare. The slide which you can see is a relationship between technical complexity and structural characteristics. In the same study of 100 organizations, if we also study the structural characteristics of those organizations, the empirical studies ने जो हमें बताया है, वो slide I'm trying to show you, and we will discuss all the three types: unit production, mass production, and continuous process. And we will discuss them under various structural characteristic headings like management levels, like formalization or centralization or specialization. So if you look at their management levels, the empirical evidence shows us that in unit production companies, usually management level 3 होते हैं, mass production companies में 4 और continuous process companies में 6. So यहाँ से आपके ज़हन में एक स्ट्रक्चर, एक डिज़ाइन के बारे में बेसिस बननी शुरू हो जाएंगे. I'm not saying that this is what it should be. This is what it is. If you go to a unit production company or a mass production company, continuous process production company, document their management levels, their supervisory spans, their formalizations, their worker skills. तो जो भी findings सामने आई हैं, those findings are telling us that continuous process production has maximum levels of management. Supervisory span of control, which means people reporting to a supervisor, number of people reporting to a supervisor, is highest for mass production companies. इस स्टडी में देखा गया कि 48 है एवरेज पे span of control of supervisor in mass production as compared to 23 in unit production and 15 in continuous production. मतलब हमें आहिस्ता आहिस्ता क्लियर होंगे कि एक चीज़ तो हमने ये देखी कि mass production में मैनेजमेंट लेवल्स continuous production से कम है, लेकिन सुपरवाइजरी स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल ज़्यादा है. Direct to indirect labor की ratio. Direct labor, as you know, is the human beings involved in a production process. Indirect labor is indirect because human beings are behind everything, but this indirect labor is probably more so through machines. So direct to indirect labor की अगर ratio देखी जाए तो वो सबसे ज़्यादा हमें unit production में नज़र आती है. The ratio is 9 to 1. अगर 9 काम डायरेक्ट लेबर ने करने हैं तो एक काम इनडायरेक्ट लेबर से होगा, whereas it decreases to 4 to 1 in mass production and becomes at parity 1-on-1 in continuous process. So that again tells us the level of mechanization involved in continuous process, and also 9 to 1 ratio for unit production tells us the importance, the prime importance of human operators in that sort of settings. And if we look at worker skills, now worker skills will mean here the skills of actually production technology. अगर आप unit production में हैं तो naturally you need highly skilled people, highly skilled workers, because they are meeting customized orders. तो यहाँ पर worker skills in unit productions will be high, and they will also be high in continuous process because over there the ability to run machines and the ability to run those machines continuously without any stoppage, without any shutdown demands high skills. But in mass production, Once you have given skills to people, then they keep on repeating the same job again and again, again and again. Therefore, the level of skills development or worker skills is not as high as unit production or continuous production. Formalization is seen to be highest in mass production companies, or it is low in unit and continuous production. Similarly, centralization of decision making is highest in mass production companies as opposed to the other two types, and verbal communication is also lowest in mass production companies. You can imagine यहाँ पे standardized assembly line है और standardized product बन रहे हैं, वहाँ पर there is less demand for one-to-one communication or meetings, whereas in unit production this demand is high. Verbal communication is high, and it becomes high again in continuous production, because there it is true that production is taken care by the machineries, but the nature of the process is such, it is 24-hour process, it has to be managed around the clock, so it needs meetings, it demands discussions. Therefore, the amount of verbal communication is high in continuous production, but written communication is not high in continuous and unit production, whereas written communication is high in mass production. Now, a clear picture has emerged in front of us that mass production has more supervisory span of control, has low skills of workers, has high formalization, high centralization of decision making, low verbal communication and high written communication, and it all points towards a mechanistic structure or mechanistic design. Therefore, the overall structure or overall design of a company which is engaged in mass production will be mechanistic, whereas the unit production as well as the continuous production companies will have organic design, because over there the degree of formalization is low, centralization is low, there is a high degree of verbal communication and low degree of written communication, and supervisory span of control is also low as compared to mass production. Therefore, in those companies which are using the unit production of small batch or continuous process as their production technology, they will have an organic design. So now you can see how technology and production process directly affects the structure and design of a company. Similarly, another index which Woodward study and then the later empirical studies based on Woodward's work has explored and has presented in front of us is the ratio between managers or management and total personnel. कितने लोग management के हैं out of the total number of employees present in a company? This ratio was seen to be low in unit production. As we can understand, a small job shop sort of arrangement, maybe one owner who is also the main owner manager sort of personality will have 2 or 3 people with him, so the management to total personnel ratio will be low. This will become slightly high when we move to mass production, because over here we are now dealing with standardization and formalization and assembly lines, so the middle management will assume important roles, but this will become extremely important. The management to total personnel ratio will become even more pronounced in continuous production process, because it is there that the whole process is mechanized. You need maximum management, or you need maximum supervision, or you need maximum, you can say not control, but you have to monitor the process. Therefore, and monitoring at a higher level, because the reporting is also, the amount of reports and the level of reporting is also increasing. So the managers will be, the ratio between managers and total personnel will be more in continuous production process companies. Now, Woodward, in her own words, has described that different technologies impose different kinds of demands on individuals and organizations, and those demands had to be met through appropriate structure. These are a few words of wisdom from Woodward herself, because as we can see that in unit production, the demand on individual or demand on the company is customization, whereas in mass production, obviously that demand or that focus is volume production and standardized production, and in continuous process that focus changes. So as the technology changes, as the tools, equipment, machinery, and the machinery to man and man to machinery ratio changes, there are different demands which are put on the organization. There are different demands there which are put on the departments, and there are different demands which are put on the individuals. Therefore, to accommodate those demands, to adjust to those demands, or to address to those demands, changes are required to be done in structure and design of the company. Changes in terms of creating coordination or creating less coordination, creating more control, or creating a more horizontal organization, or creating more vertical organization. These all adjustments are done basically through structure and design, and therefore technology has a very crucial impact on the design and structure of a company. Another type of manufacturing which is gaining popularity these days is called computer integrated manufacturing, or CIM. CIM is also called advanced manufacturing technology, or agile manufacturing, or the factory of the future, or the smart factory, or flexible manufacturing systems. The advantage which CIM, or computerized integrated manufacturing, provides is that it opens up the possibility of mass customization. Means that you can customize your product or your service at a large scale level, but in a short duration of time. Otherwise, mass production will obviously demand setting up an assembly line, and will demand long runs of production, and will take time. But if you are, say, running an international chain of fast foods, for example, or international chain of fashion clothing or designing, wahan par you will like to customize, and customize in a mass customized way, so that many relatively similar products but with different changes are produced, and that is done through computerized integrated manufacturing. And these two techniques, if we compare mass production with CIM, or computerized integrated manufacturing, we will again notice that there are differences in terms of the various organizational characteristics will vary and will differ. For example, in mass production, the span of control is wide. Empirical studies indicate that the span of control, and we have already seen as compared to unit production and continuous production. If we now compare it to companies which use computerized integrated manufacturing, then the span of control for mass production is much wider than the CIM companies, where it is quite narrow. The hierarchy levels, or the management layers, are many in mass production companies, whereas there are quite few in companies having CIM. Tasks are routine tasks in mass production, because standardized parts are produced, and it is mass production which is giving us those standardized parts. Therefore, the tasks are repetitive. It is not that they encounter new things on daily basis. They are doing the same thing again and again, again and again. But the CIM companies, since they are into mass customization, therefore their tasks are not routine but adaptive, which means they're flexible. They have more variety. Specialization, as we've already seen, is high in companies which are engaged in mass production, but it will be low in CIM because of mass customization. It is not mass production. Decision making in mass production companies with a mechanistic design is obviously going to be centralized. Again, here the hierarchy is vertical, the focus is control. In CIM companies, focus is not control. Focus is to produce mass customized product. Therefore, the decision making is not centralized but decentralized. अब ये important point है. Why centralization has so much effect on not only the design of a company but on the selection of a mechanistic or organic design में आपने देखा होगा, decision making assumes a central role, and it is vital. If the production process or the company is producing standardized products, then obviously decision making needs to be centralized. फिर तो हर point पे decision making की जरूरत नहीं, because if those companies which are engaged in mass production and standardized production, if they decentralize decision making, then they will not be able to control the quality according to this demands of standardization. Agar wo decision making top pe hogi, then that control is possible. And where you need innovation, where you need customization, there you cannot have centralized decision making, because one person cannot produce mass customization, or one person cannot customize. For customization you need different people, and different people at different levels of management or hierarchy. Therefore you demand or you need decentralization. So decision making ka jo style hai, that is very crucial in telling us whether a company is mechanistic or organic, or whether it should be mechanistic or organic. Overall structure of a mass production company, we have already seen while comparing with other two production technologies, that the overall design, overall structure of this company is mechanistic. क्योंकि इसमें formalization भी है, standardization भी है. लेकिन CIM companies का जो overall design है, structure है, वो organic, because the underlying philosophy is mass customization and not mass production. So you can, I'm sure, now start appreciating that how the focus of a company precedes or how it leads the structure and design of the same company. अगर आपका focus cost leadership है, your design will be mechanistic, towards mechanistic. If your focus is differentiation, then your design will be towards organic. So over here our focuses are mass production and mass customization, and because of difference in the focus, we are using a different technology. We are using different tools, equipment, machineries, procedures. एक तरफ हम assembly line use कर रहे हैं, दूसरी तरफ हम computerized integrated manufacturing use कर रहे हैं. So क्योंकि focus भी different है, technology भी different है, therefore the design and structures have got to be different. There is no way they can be similar, because they are being arrived at by using different technologies, different strategies, different focus and different products. Now another way in which we can compare, अभी तक तो हमने इनको compare किया है purely from the point of views of certain organizational and structural characteristics. Organizational characteristics को हमने इतना ज़्यादा अभी explore नहीं किया इस comparison में between the production of mass production companies and mass customization companies. अगर हम देखें एक कंपनी जहाँ पर assembly line है और एक कंपनी जहाँ पर computer integrated manufacturing है, और हम ये देखें कि इन दोनों की HR interactions में या human resources के जो interactions हैं उनमें क्या फ़र्क है. So the empirical studies tell us that interactions in a mass production companies होते हैं interactions human being के, लेकिन stand alone है, isolated interactions. Whereas in computer integrated manufacturing, these interactions, HR interactions, are not standalone. They are not isolated, but they are teamwork interactions. और इसीलिए डिजाइन ऑर्गेनिक की जरूरत है, क्योंकि आप मैस कस्टमाइजेशन कर रहे हैं, आप कंप्यूटर के थ्रू कंप्यूटर इंटीग्रेटेड मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कर रहे हैं. यहां पर यू नीड पूल ऑफ पीपल who are exchanging information, exchanging ideas, not only how to produce this particular product, but how to design its production, how to, in terms of computer, how to design the runs of production. इसके लिए they need groups of people to interact with each other, and that is why the human resource interactions are teamwork interactions, group interactions, and that is again natural, and that fits very well with the organic design of the company. Very similarly, the standalone HR interactions of the mass production companies fit in nicely with the mechanistic design of the company, because we have seen that over there the design is mechanistic and the decision making is centralized. There is no need for teamwork, HR interactions or multiple and daily interactions. They are standalone interactions. इसी तरह, if we look at another HR facet which the companies use, and that is the area of training. So training, mass production companies के employees को जो चाहिए वो नैरो ट्रेनिंग, नैरो इन द सेंस दैट एज आई ऑलरेडी टोल्ड यू कि एक दो आपने वो स्किल्स ले ली और आपका काम है असेंबली लाइन पे पॉइंट ए पे आप खड़े एंड यू आर डेली डूइंग इट. So once you are trained, you don't need to take frequent retrainings. आपको frequent refreshing की जरूरत नहीं, इसलिए trainings narrow होंगी. But in CIM companies, trainings will be broad इसलिए because they will be beyond the focus, beyond the piece of work in front of you. आप team work में जब होते हैं, team work में you are not only concerned about your work, but you are directly affecting the work of other people. इसलिए आपको जो टीम वर्क में सिर्फ टेक्निकल स्किल्स नहीं दी जाती, टीम वर्क में आपको ह्यूमन स्किल्स भी दी जाती. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, इफ यू हैव टू डिजाइन समथिंग सिटिंग अलोन एंड यू हैव टू डिजाइन द सेम थिंग इन अ टीम, अब आपको डिजाइनिंग की स्किल्स तो दोनों केसेस में आनी चाहिए, चाहे आप अकेले हैं चाहे आप टीम में हैं. बट in the second case where you are designing that sitting in a team, you also need to have human skills so that you can interact with people. You need excellent or good communication. You need good coordination. You need to understand people and their body language and their gestures, and also you need to be a good listener. You need to pay attention to details. So ये सारी चीजें जो facts हैं, they demand that the training is broad. It is not only technical, but it is also in human elements you train them. You give them training in interpersonal skills. You give them training in coordination. You give them training in all the lateral activities or critical thinkings or team building, morale, the group spirit, the team spirit. They need these activities and they need this sort of training on top of their technical skills. And since technical skills भी आप mass customize कर रहे हैं, so the possibility is that you will need frequent technical trainings because you need upgradation of your skills. It is not like mass production where you have some skills and then you are using those skills repeatedly. Here the skills are built and you require new ones because new orders are coming, new trends are coming, the environment is changing, the customer demands are changing. So you need to have upgraded skill inventory. Therefore, you can see that the level of HR interactions and the level of trainings required will be different in the two setups. Similarly, the expertise का मतलब है कि लोगों की जो skills का focus है वो mass production company में mechanized नहीं, because you're standing on a conveyor belt assembly line पे आप हैं and you are mostly dealing with your hands. So you are picking things up from a conveyor belt or आप उस पर चीज़ें रख रहे हैं, उठा रहे हैं, तो आपको ज़्यादा जो एक्सपर्टीज चाहिए वो मैनुअल एक्सपर्टीज चाहिए. जबकि कंप्यूटर इंटीग्रेटेड मैन्युफैक्चरिंग में आपकी एक्सपर्टीज कॉग्निटिव हैं ज़्यादा मैनुअल से. कॉग्निटिव मीन्स विच इन्वॉल्व अ लॉट ऑफ थिंकिंग. कॉग्निशन, एज वी नो, इज आवर एबिलिटी टू थिंक. कॉग्निशन इज आवर नॉलेज बेसिकली. कॉग्निशन इज आवर एबिलिटी टू डू वर्क यूजिंग आवर माइंड, नॉट ओनली आवर हैंड्स. अब आपने सुना होगा, there are, and you must have noticed, there are many professions which only involve manual expertise or manual skills. Like, for example, फैक्ट्री के फ्लोर पे या आम आप देखते हैं वेल्डर्स हैं जो लोग वेल्ड कर रहे हैं. they need, I mean, cognition तो हर चीज़ के लिए थोड़ी बहुत तो आपको चाहिए, but the main focus is how they weld. और एक स्टिचर है, how he puts the stitch. Whereas a person who is involved in designing, he will probably need more cognition and later on perhaps manual skills, but first more cognition so that he can come up with a design. जहाँ पर भी ज़्यादा ideas चाहिए, innovation चाहिए, teamwork चाहिए, obviously वहाँ पर expertise का focus will be more cognition or cognitive as compared to the place where you need less teamwork, where your job is routine, where your tasks are repetitive, and there your expertise will be less cognitive and probably more manual. इसी तरह कस्टमर्स की डिमांड्स को भी अगर हम देखें, एक मैस प्रोडक्शन कंपनी जिस ऑटोमोबाइल असेंबली लाइन है, इनके कस्टमर्स की डिमांड्स एज कंपेयर टू, एज आई सेड, अ वेरी ट्रेंडी फैशन डिजाइनिंग और फैशन क्लॉथ्स की कंपनी है, उनके कस्टमर की डिमांड्स को अगर हम कंपेयर करें we'll see that the motor car customers, the ordinary motor cars which are not luxury cars, उनके जो customers हैं उनकी demands को इतनी ज़्यादा change नहीं होती. What do they expect in a new model or a new edition? Maybe slightly different design, या कई दफ़ा 8-10 साल एक ही तरह के डिज़ाइन चलते हैं. Maybe slightly different सीट्स भी एक तरह की होती हैं, इंटीरियर भी एक जैसा है, उनमें स्लाइट डिफरेंसेस हैं. कोई नए एट्रीब्यूट आ गए, कोई थोड़ी सी नई टेक्नोलॉजी आ गई, विंडोज़ की रोलिंग की वो आ गई, कोई इंजन में थोड़ी सी नई टेक्नोलॉजी आ गई. बट you will appreciate that most of the big brands which we have of the cars, जिनके नाम तो मैं नहीं लूँगा, लेकिन उनमें कोई इतनी ज़्यादा चेंजेस आती नहीं है मॉडल्स में, और ना ही उनकी प्रोडक्शन और उनकी डिज़ाइनिंग के दौरान a huge amount of customer feedback is collected. कभी आपने तो ये नहीं देखा कि हमारे यहाँ भी जो असेंबली होती है कार्स की, उसमें हमारी राय को कितनी अहमियत दी जाती है? इतनी ज़्यादा नहीं. लेकिन जो दूसरी मैंने एग्जांपल दी आपको, फैशन क्लोथिंग, वहां पर कस्टमर डिमांड इज चेंजिंग वेरी क्विकली, क्योंकि ट्रेंड फैशन चेंजेस वेरी क्विकली एज कंपेयर टू दी ट्रेंड्स एंड फैशंस इन कार्स. ट्रेंड्स एंड फैशंस इन क्लोथिंग are much more fluid, much more volatile, much more short-lived. इसलिए उन कस्टमर्स की डिमांड ज़्यादा जल्दी चेंज होती रहेंगी. इसलिए इन्वायरमेंट ज़्यादा टर्बुलेंट होगा ऑफ दोज कंपनीज विच आर इन्वॉल्व्ड इन CIM एज कंपेयर टू दोज कंपनीज which are producing products on assembly line, because of the stability which their customers have in putting up their demands. They don't change very quickly. They don't change quickly relative to the example which I have given. इसी तरह आपके suppliers हैं. Now, if you are a automobile company, you will probably have many suppliers because कई parts उसमें use हो रहे हैं. कोई part आप इधर से ले रहे हैं, कुछ पार्ट्स आप वहां से ले रहे हैं, कुछ पार्ट्स आप बाहर से मंगवा रहे हैं. सो योर सप्लायर्स आर मेनी. बट इन इफ यू आर डूइंग फैशन डिजाइनिंग, आप क्लोथ्स डिजाइनिंग कर रहे हैं, कंप्यूटर पे कर रहे हैं, यहां पर आपके सप्लायर कम होंगे. और दो कौन होंगे सप्लायर आप पे जिन पे आप हेवीली रिलाय कर सकते हो, विच आर योर क्लोज रिलेशंस. सो दीज कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स आर ऑल्सो नाउ टेलिंग अस अ स्टोरी that because of the differences in management characteristics, which are also result of basically the difference in technology, the difference in product leads to difference in strategies. Difference in strategies is leading to difference in structure and design. That is fine and understandable. ये वही पोर्टर के जो मॉडल से हमें समझ आती है. इंडस्ट्री का स्ट्रक्चर leads to picking up a strategy, either cost leadership or differentiation. Then once we have picked that strategy, then that strategy decides our organizational structure. Cost leadership है तो mechanistic होगा, और अगर differentiation है तो organic होगा. यहाँ पर भी हमने देखा that the people around us, our customers, their requirements in CIM companies are frequently changing, their demands are frequently changing. Or because of the nature of the product and the nature of the consumer behavior, we will have a company which will have a much more organic and free-flowing structure as compared to a company which is engaged in assembly lines, a company which is engaged in production of mass-produced products or standardized products. So, it is not the technicals which decide the structures of a company. In fact, it is the same story of products and services and consumers. उनके इंटरेक्शंस और उनकी डिमांड कितनी जल्दी चेंज हो रही हैं, कितनी जल्दी चेंज नहीं हो रही, दैट विल डिसाइड व्हाट सॉर्ट ऑफ एम्प्लॉयज वी नीड इनसाइड द कंपनी. क्योंकि हमने देखा कि अगर वो डिमांड कंज्यूमर की स्टेबल है, अगर वो डिमांड्स इतनी फ्रीक्वेंटली चेंज नहीं होती, तो फिर हमें कंपनी के अंदर जो कल्चर चाहिए वो भी रिलेटिवली स्टेबल ही चाहिए. उसमें भी हमें इतनी ज़्यादा इनोवेशन, टीम वर्क, मीटिंग्स की ज़रूरत नहीं. बट ऑन द अदर हैंड, if the consumers are volatile in their demands because of the nature of the product, if it is a high velocity industry like IT industry, जहाँ पर changes are very quick, then obviously consumer tastes will change quickly. To cater to those quick changes in consumer tastes, or to capture those changes in consumer taste, We need, inside the company, we need a culture where people frequently meet with each other. We need a culture which promotes innovation. We need a culture which promotes immediate adaptation to consumer demands. And that is only possible if we have a free-flowing, horizontal, structured culture which is based on teamwork. अब teamwork, अभी तक हमने जो देखा, the teamwork is only required and needed when the product and the customers demand that there should be teamwork. Otherwise, out of fashion हम teamwork नहीं करते. There are confusions. कुछ ज़हनों में confusion ही होती है that the answer to every management problem is to make a team, or the answer to every production problem is to make a team. That will work only if the involvement of many minds is required. If that involvement is not required frequently, then the teams will only sit together, will have some gupshup, will sip tea, and that is it. Obviously, that is not the focus for which people are brought together to work in organizations. So in this session, we have seen that, and we will continue talking about technology, and we will move into the technology of departments. क्योंकि हर department की भी अपनी अपनी technology है, चाहे हम एक ही organization के departments की बात कर रहे हैं. But in this session, we talked about the organization, overall organization, and we saw that if the organization is a manufacturing organization, then it will belong to one of the three production types of its technology of production will belong to either unit production, small batch, or mass production, or continuous production. और इसमें हमने ये भी देखा that why sometimes it will be unit production and why it will be mass production, it will depend on what is that company producing. If that company is producing job shops, customized, individual customized orders, unit production. If it is producing standardized products and large number, mass production, then obviously mass production or assembly line is the focus. And if the company is a continuous process company where it is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week without interruptions, then it will have different demands on its design and it will have different demands on its environment. और एक चीज मजीद जिसको मेरे ख्याल में इस सेशन ने क्लैरिफाई किया होगा, and we have already talked about it, that technology is not, it does not necessarily mean involving machines only. ठीक है, टेक्निकल कम्प्लेक्सिटी के साथ हमने मशीन को रिलेट किया है, टेक्नोलॉजी के साथ नहीं किया. टेक्नोलॉजी कैन बी प्योरली मैनुअल बिकॉज टेक्नोलॉजी is the process of conversion of inputs into outputs. That could be manual, that could be mechanized. इसकी बेस के ऊपर फिर ये पता चलेगा कि टेक्निकल कम्प्लेक्सिटी आपकी क्या है. If that process of converting inputs into outputs demand heavy role of human beings, then your process or your production process is less complex technically क्योंकि ज़्यादा काम इंसान के हाथ से हो. लेकिन अगर इस प्रोसेस के लिए ज़्यादा काम मशीनों ने करना है, then we will call this process as technically complex. Complex because it is now done by the machines which are in turn monitored and controlled by human beings. So those people controlling the machines, they have the skills to monitor and control the machines, and they have to make sure that this process where, क्योंकि आप ये नोट करेंगे कि अगर असेंबली लाइन में एरर्स आनी शुरू हो जाएंगी then the whole process will be disrupted. एक छोटी सी जॉब शॉप में अगर एरर आती है, you can immediately stop the process and correct it. Assembly line में error will start from one end and will keep on occurring till the end, और बीच में भी अगर आपको उस एरर का पता चलता है, it will be difficult to stop the process. In process जो inspection and testing है, that is much more expensive than inspection and testing in the first place. So therefore job shop को रोकना process को और mistake को rectify करना is not that expensive, is not that time consuming as it would become when we are talking about mass production companies. और फिर we also compared and we also discussed another type of production technology which is getting popular these days, the advanced manufacturing technology, or factories of the future which are engaged in production through the use of computers, computerized, computer integrated manufacturing. आपने CAD और CAM का भी नाम सुना होगा, जो कंप्यूटर एडेड डिजाइनिंग है और कंप्यूटर एडेड मैन्युफैक्चरिंग है. दैट इज नॉट कंप्यूटर इंटीग्रेटेड मैन्युफैक्चरिंग. लेकिन CAD and CAM are also a sort of computer integrated manufacturing, because इसमें भी आप कंप्यूटर को यूज कर रहे हैं. In one case you are using it for designing, and in the second case you are using it for manufacturing. And we saw that mass production will be the most mechanistic of all these four types of production processes. In fact, mass production ही वो वाहिद production technology है which will demand a typical mechanistic design. Otherwise unit production में भी हमने देखा, और continuous production में भी हमने देखा, और computer integrated manufacturing में भी हमने देखा that we will need an organic design. Reasons मुख्तलिफ हैं. यूनिट प्रोडक्शन में ऑर्गेनिक डिजाइन जरूरत क्यों है? द नीड इज डिफरेंट. वहां पर इसलिए है बिकॉज यू आर डीलिंग विद वन एंड वन, यू आर डीलिंग विद कस्टमर्स. और चाहे आप एक ही प्रोडक्ट बना रहे हैं फिर भी उसके अंदर वेरिएशंस हैं. जैसे मैंने आपको शूज की एग्जांपल दी थी. वन कस्टमर कैन कम एंड से मुझे इसकी सोल थिक चाहिए. दूसरे साहब आएंगे वो कहेंगे नहीं मुझे सोल तो नहीं थिक चाहिए, मुझे हील फर्क चाहिए. तीसरे साहब आएंगे वो कहेंगे मुझे इसकी जो टिप है वो पसंद नहीं, मुझे इसकी टिप नैरो करके दें या ब्रॉड करके दें. फिर उसके ऊपर लेदर की टाइप पे कस्टमाइजेशन हो सकती है, कलर की बेस पे कस्टमाइजेशन हो सकती है. देयर आर मेनी फेसेट्स जिस पे आप कस्टमाइज इसको कर सकते हैं. देयरफॉर यूनिट प्रोडक्शन में योर सेटअप इज गोइंग टू बी ऑर्गेनिक. कॉन्टिन्यूस प्रोडक्शन में आपका सेटअप इसलिए ऑर्गेनिक है क्योंकि वो कॉन्टिन्यूस प्रोसेस है, वो रुकेगा नहीं, वो 7 दिन चलेगा, 24 घंटे चलेगा, 365 दिन चलेगा. So now we have seen that how technology affects our structure and design. We'll continue talking about this in our next session. Till then, it is Khuda Hafiz.